All right. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us. We are really excited to talk returns today. With us today is Ben Crosby from Two Boxes. I'll let him introduce himself, but excited to have a special guest with us to dive into, what's working, what doesn't work, how do we improve these numbers where it comes to e-commerce and returns. So I'm Jess Wyndham, CEO of Solving Work. Look, holistic logistics consultant focusing on solving problems within shippers, focusing on people, processes, and technology. And I'll pass it over to Matthew.
Hey, this is Matthew from Monarch Connect, co-founder. Finally, don't have to go by the logistics ambassador, but still am the logistics ambassador. I know you guys all like that. We do 3PL. I don't like the word brokerage. We're logistics architects, as I put it. We solve problems, a little bit of that engineering for everybody, and that's what we do. And I'll pass it down to John, who's live on location.
I am. The benefits of modern life. So I'm John, founder and principal of Operational Innovations. I hate saying it, but logistics consulting and solution provider that really is about helping brands or service providers drive more value through the operations. So not just based on cost and cost containment, but really on quality of revenue and revenue generation and supporting growth, because that's kind of what everybody needs. And Matt took all the big fancy titles, so you can have the architect and the ambassadors. And then Ben, we're going to pass it over to you. You can jump in and happy to have you with us today.
Awesome. Thanks, John, and thanks everyone for hosting me here today. It's a pleasure to be part of the panel. Ben Crosby, head of sales and partnerships at Two Boxes. Two Boxes is a software company. Typically, our customers are 3PLs or brands who need technology on their warehouse to better receive, inspect, and disposition returned inventory. So very excited to be part of a returns discussion here. And prior to Two Boxes, spent some time at Shopify, some other software companies on the WMS and TMS side, and grew up working at a 3PL in operations here in Toronto. So got a couple different perspectives I'll share with you today. And excited to jump on in.
Awesome. And as always, please drop your comments, questions into the chat. There is like a slight delay, so it'll take us a second to get there, but we're really interested in making this a very collaborative discussion today. High level, when I was doing my research, it's like 1 in 17 items gets returned. I don't know, Ben, do you have some more numbers about sort of the state of returns in the world today?
For sure. So I'll break it down by product segment because I think that's a really important thing to look at when you're trying to gauge return volume. So typically in the footwear space, that's where we're going to see the highest return volume. It's not unlikely to see a 30 to 40% return rate because of sizing, right? If it's a new brand, I'm sure we all experienced it. You're not really sure those half sizes or, certain things like boots or sports type shoes. And so people will buy 3 pairs, keep one and return the other 2. And that results in a big influx of return volume. I think close behind that is apparel for the same reasons, but also people not sure of the material it's made out of. Could be a new brand they've never tried before. And so they're often buying multiple variations or sizes, which then proliferates in returns. And then you're seeing other things like household goods that are higher valued. Sometimes folks aren't really sure. They can't touch it and feel it in store when they buy online. And so they'll get it in the mail, figure out it's not quite good for what they need it, and then end up returning it. So that's usually, apparel 10, 20, 25% return rates of overall outbound volume. So hope that helps there.
So a lot. And the interesting thing about shoes is that that's such a high profile box. Like the cost to return 2 pairs, to ship out 3 pairs of shoes and return 2 is pretty astronomical. So it's kind of an interesting business model that they need to plan for. So I was thinking, go ahead.
I was gonna say I'm so surprised by that shoe because I don't think I've ever returned shoes in my life. Like I've always been, but I can see that people buying a whole bunch of pairs and trying them on, but buying 3 pairs to try, like, I don't know, one size fits all, I guess.
Yeah, but don't forget, right? Like, I mean, that concept isn't consumer born. Showrooming is something that retailers themselves started to try to lower the risk and lower the barrier for sales. Be like, guys, we want you to buy. We understand that it's harder to buy online. So, buy the 2, buy the 3, and we're just going to return it. We're even going to have the free shipping and label in there before you start. So, unfortunately, the showrooming behavior was an extension of what you were able already to do in stores. Retailers supported it. And when e-commerce was like this big of, part of your sales, it didn't really matter. But as it's been exploding and it's continuing, now is where you're seeing it becoming unmanageable.
Do you guys know, like back in the day with the Sears catalog or Fingerhut, I should have looked this up before, but I just had the thought right now, like what was their return policy? Were they really generous? Like where sort of this e-commerce began, well before even the internet. I wonder how they solved this in the early days of things.
Well,
I'm guessing
I can comment. I used to work in retail sales in high school at sport retailers, and typically, even fast forward to today, I'll go into an outlet mall and go to the different stores and ask them, how do they manage returns? How do they inspect them so they make sure it's authentic and not counterfeit or not worn 100 times? And I think the answer is they're very liberal, very loose with their policy. If it's returned within the time that they said, which is typically 30 days, they'll give a refund or an exchange to most goods, okay? Unless it's a blatant, hey, it was supposed to be a Nike shoe and someone gives a no-name knockoff from overseas. That's really the only time they'll reject it, because they want that customer to return and to buy more from them in the future. So they want to give that good experience. But that's obviously a paradox with the unit economics and, cost to these returns potentially just ending up in the landfill, even if they're in still good condition. So I think that's where the true disconnect begins, is how do you balance customer experience along with the unit economics and the outcome of where does this inventory go after it's been
returned? And that's a good point, right? Because I think a lot of the solutions like what you guys are doing, and there's others in the space as well, is kind of a problem that was bubbling and really building up under the surface, and now it's just like a geyser that's kind of like broken through, right? Because look at a company like Zara, right? One of the most profitable retail and apparel brands in the world. Like they operate at like 60% margin. Like that, these guys didn't care about returns. It's like, that shirt probably, like to Ben's point, a little loose. Shirt really shouldn't be returned, but does it really matter when it's an $80 t-shirt that I paid $5 for? Getting ready for this, I saw something about a week and a half ago. It's like customers outraged that Coco Chanel bag of $2,587 cost $57 to make. It's like, well, like, what did you think? It's not gold lined or anything like that. Like, when it comes down to cotton and leather, or even worse, vegan leather, whatever, like there's only so many of these materials that go around, and there's not enough like real advanced materials out there to actually justify the cost. Like if you look into certain segments, they do have some really high-end tech fabrics and really engineered fabrics, but that's still not what you're seeing in these designer stores, as an example, right? Those are ultra niche type products.
Yeah. And when I was thinking about this conversation, I was like, okay, well, the questions that arose for me, and I wonder if you guys have any others, and then maybe we can start digging into some of these, is how do we make returns more efficient? Because the number's not going to go down to 0. That's unreasonable. But maybe 1 in 18 is too high. How do we reduce them given that point? And then how do we improve customer lifetime value, brand loyalty, things like that through the return process, because it's going to be part of the transaction. And then lastly, sustainability. How do we, ensure that we're taking care of the planet as well as the people? Those were the sort of questions that sort of arose for me. Anything that came up for you guys that I didn't mention?
Yeah, one of the things I thought is I think return policies is such a huge part of the customer buying experience. And we've touched upon this before, is if you don't have a good return policy, you're not going to shop at that place. And the ones that have a great policy, like we talked about before, Princess Auto or Costco, they have such a loyalty behind it because of their return policy, because you have like that security, I'm going to buy something. So that reducing that return from a consumer point of view is going to be extremely hard, in my opinion. It has to be some kind of play where there's secondary stores like Amazon's doing these bin stores where all these returns are going to this one location, and then you can go through a reduced pile of clothes like Winners or TJ Maxx and all those kind of aspects. I think that's going to be more of that solution. So something along the lines of logistical solution where you don't have to go bring it back to that central warehouse and then bring it back to another retailer to then resell it at a different cost. You go, hey, this is a return. At that point of sale, you send it to that next discounter versus throwing it to the landfill or whatnot, and try to bypass that system, knowing there's going to be some kind of abuse somewhere in the middle, but it's going to help reduce that whole aspect of it.
Well, and I'm curious, and then maybe Ben, you could jump into what you guys are doing a little bit. But I mean, I think that for the most part, it's a two-part problem, right? I mean, I think that you have to have mechanisms and tools and processes and partners in place to deal with the physical operations. Like, you are going to get unitary items back, and our forward supply chain is not really built for that, right? We ship in master packs and ratio packs and pallets and cases and whatever. So to get back the t-shirt or their pair of pants or the socks or whatever, I mean, I think that requires a very different, sort of intention behind it. So I think there's that piece. But I also think that, to your point, Matt, about the policy, I think policies have to probably become a little bit more dynamic. And Ben, I don't know if you're seeing this too, but it's like, how do you start managing the problem at the start? I think Matt, you might remember. I think my newsletter like a number of months ago was like, what about returns was, the best way to survive a gunfight is to essentially not get shot in the first place. So it's like, how do you do more at the start, before you just deal with the problem? Because to your point, you're always going to have a problem, and you're always going to have a certain percentage of stuff you have to process back. But 30% returns on apparel these days versus 8 to 12% when it's in the store and people are touching it and doing whatever, and then sometimes lower in other categories. Like, you have to start managing it, because the boomerang activity and the showrooming is a little out of hand. So Ben, I'll let you jump in maybe on any of that.
So I'm going to break it down into three main cogs in the reverse logistics flow. So starting upstream, we've got the initiation, which is made up of a few different things. How does the buyer initiate that return and essentially get that return label? And there's different options there, different strategies altogether. But then, where that leads to is the second piece, the in-warehouse side. So receiving, inspecting, and dispositioning that returned inventory. And then thirdly is, where does that product go? Is it a different marketplace? Is it a different channel at a different price point? There are a lot of tools and new offerings out there, solutions to help with that. It's really tough to find a one-size-fits-all for all three of those. They're very distinct parts of the flow. And I think that there's different strategies depending on the brand and what products they're selling and what that buyer persona looks like. If it's a $10 phone case or a $10 lip gloss, does it make sense for it to go through an inspection, refurbishment? Probably not. That's probably overkill. But if it's $500 leather boots or high-end, perfume, I think there is a lot of money left on the table if that stuff goes straight to the landfill. So we can go into any of those three, because there is devil in the details there, but that might be a good start to explore.
Well, I mean, that was the whole thing about, I don't know if you remember back in the day, Wayfair had that whole piece where they just didn't even bother accepting those returns. They're like, just keep it, we'll send you a new one. You'd send a picture of the damage, like, just chuck it. We'll send you a new one. And people were abusing that like nobody else, and it was a very common thing. And same as Amazon at the beginning, when they didn't have that whole figured out aspect of how we're going to get these returns and what are we going to do with them. It was just like a keep it stage. But to your point is, if I'm going to order pens off of Amazon and they came in busted, what's the point of me sending it back? Just it's a $5 purchase. And what's that threshold? You're going to have abuse at some point of some people abusing that system. But to the most part, it's you're just going to resend it and take that hit, right?
Well, and I think to the abuse point is, and I think this is something that Two Boxes does. So Ben, you'll have to let me know if I'm getting confused, because there are so many overlapping technologies in the return space. Like, your return tech stack can be like 6 providers deep, I think, at this point. But being able to, and maybe it's not Two Boxes, so now I'm confused, but being able to, based on that individual customer and their buying history, decide what to do with that return, whether or not we immediately refund or we do, or we wait until the package is in house or whatever, to be able to apply individual rules. And I think this is a place where maybe the integration of AI starts to help with the decision making and things like that, or it could just remain rule based. I don't know. But I think that that's interesting, tailoring it to the individual consumer, because I don't need the customer lifetime value of a fraudulent customer to be high, right? Like there's no winning there. But when there is an ability to win, maybe we can start to leverage technology to do something with it.
Yeah, maybe I'll go through like how the old way used to be to start a return and what happened to it. So you guys might experience this as a shopper, right? You buy something, not satisfied for whatever reason, but then you got to call a number or send an email to initiate that return. It's just not scalable, nor is it a good customer experience. Usually you get frustrated and you're like, the heck with this, I'm not going to buy from that merchant again, essentially, right? So now there are tools that it's all self-service. The buyer can get their label, whether it's off the merchant's rate card, the 3PL's rate card, or perhaps it's they're paying out of pocket at the post office, whatever it is, and getting that product back. Now, there are new technologies that are even taking this one level more upstream. So if you know Loop Returns, they just came out with a product called Offset. There's also a company called Redo doing this, where at checkout, the buyer can buy protection, almost like insurance, for if they ever need to return this, it's now free and they're covered. Okay, so they're actually being more proactive. Go ahead, Jess. You had something.
Yeah, so I have there's a brand here locally in Denver, and I've met the owner, and so I was talking to her about incorporating Redo, because I remember I bought something off the website and I was like, oh man, at checkout I can protect this purchase, and I'm pretty sure I chose not to protect my purchase. I was like, it's activewear, I feel pretty confident, the sizing here, but I was like, does this encourage returns? Because if I buy that insurance, maybe I'll feel more like that I should use it because I paid for it. And she didn't indicate that was her experience, and that it's just a better overall, outside of maybe the boomer category, it's a better overall experience for her brand and her customers.
But sorry, maybe just to jump in there, Ben, like to expand on that. So does that mean like that's a product that the intention is to allow, like, give that free returns? Because I'm assuming probably the benefit, and when I was younger, spent a lot of time in the retail electronics space selling extended warranties and things like that, right? And there's a big Matt's laughing, he knows why. But like there was a big difference between like the retail charge and the actual cost and things like that of what went actually for insurance versus what was pure play profit for the store. So if anyone wants to ever really get into those numbers, that's an interesting conversation that I wouldn't put out there publicly. But anyways, the point is that is it really more something that then is to help reduce the overall cost? Because I mean, if you're buying insurance in bulk, the whole point of the insurance industry is that, hey, we sell a lot of it, we use a smaller percentage. But then it also sounds like it's now shifting what was used to be, or traditionally, or at least still done by the big retailers, as free returns, right? That they absorb into their cost and pricing models. It's kind of giving smaller brands the ability to maybe not charge full profit, $20, $25, $30 returns, because they just pass it through. And maybe that insurance costs $6 or $7 at the start or something like that. But it still sounds like now the returns cost is passing to the consumer, which personally I agree. Honestly, I think about that because I think it helps limit the Matt's shaking his head. No, because I think it eliminates abuse, or the potential for abuse, right? I mean, returns are there, but you don't want to have, like, I remember buying stuff from like Banana Republic or Gap or whatever, and every time you would buy something, you open it up and the return label was already in there. And I always thought that it was a really interesting, like, in some ways it was a good customer experience, but then I also was like thinking, like, you're essentially communicating to your customers that you get so many returns, it's such a big problem, it's such a hassle, that we're just going to give everybody the label ahead of time because we see so many. It seemed like you were priming the customer to return. So maybe just thinking about some of those thoughts and what you're seeing from that space.
Yeah, I think it's a new concept and time will tell. I think if you look at other similar technologies like route insurance, Shopify, even, I worked on this during my time there, has shipping insurance for their labels. that was kind of like the precedent. And they found, consumers actually do opt in. They do like that kind of peace of mind, and it might actually help at checkout for conversion rates, right? If you're showing it there, it's like, well, we stand behind our products, and if you have any issues with this, now you've got a path to getting it back to us, versus, well, all the returns are free. If you're a savvy buyer, it's baked into the cost of the product, right, at list price. And then especially, the heavier stuff like shoes, perfect example. There's a big transportation cost there, not to mention the labor at the warehouse or all the packaging material that you need to relabel, retissue paper, all of that. And so I think it's one, to help the environment and just sustainability, but then also it's like the buyer's smarter now and they understand this isn't, they might say it's free, but it's not actually free.
Well, but it's funny. So actually this morning I did a return that I've been waiting a year to do. I swear to God, it's been a year, because it's like a lifetime warranty on one of these products that I have, and it wasn't completely ruining the experience of it, but it was damaged and it would be covered under warranty. So I finally did it, because shipping it from the States versus shipping it from Canada is very different because they're down in Jacksonville. But it's interesting because they kind of have the position of like, hey, our warranty covers this, we do whatever. You're responsible to ship it down, and we're going to pay to ship it back to you again at no charge, right? Because it is a warranty service as opposed to some kind of exchange. And, to me, that has some logic, because it's like, if there's some skin in the game for the customer, especially like when you're thinking about a service or a warranty work or whatever, when it comes to shipping something that might be under that like exchange or return policy, it's like, at least then customers have to really feel the value or whatever. They're not going to be frivolous, because if I felt like, oh, I could send it in for free and get it back for free, any remote thing that I think that is just not to my wild, high expectations is going back. So that's where I think that there's an interesting play with some of these services about, like, to your point, where do you make it accessible enough, but just enough that it's not completely easy to like, just, I'm not in a great mood today, I'm sending it back.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, I think that's the overall question, which maybe we should go around and answer, is increased friction or reduced friction where it comes to returns. Which sort of school of thought do you sit in? And I think John is in the increased friction camp.
Well, I'm in the increased friction for just doing it for free, where I think that you get a lot of benefit is doing a little bit more on the front end when it comes to the customer profile, their history, and what benefits or at what point maybe benefits cease or drop off or reduce, for returns, but never not allowing a return. But, a habitual returner that returns 50% of what they buy, I honestly think that brands have to realize that is a much more expensive relationship than someone who returns 5% of what they buy or less.
I think a lot of it comes down to the data or data, depends how you say it, but it really does come down to that. Like if to John's point, because it's e-commerce, I think you have that data in there where how often you're returning. If you're not a habitual returner, you should not be penalized for those returns. But there should be a grace period where I'm buying something off of Amazon once in a while and I only return 3% a year of my returns. I expect Amazon to eat that cost, or whichever brand, if I'm, Banana or whatever. But if I'm a habitual returner where I'm constantly returning products and I'm 60% of that, eventually that cost has to be brought back, because then it affects everybody else. It's like that, the person that schemes into it, and then we have caution hot on Tim Hortons cups now because someone broke the system. It's the same thing, right? Eventually someone's breaking the system for everybody else. But at the same time, you'd expect a retailer to reduce their costs if they're penalizing the people who are the ones that are actually breaking this all the time, right? And there should be kind of like hey, you're a great shop, almost like the insurance for cars now. You're a great driver. Because you're a great driver, here's a reduction on cost because you've never returned anything. We don't associate that with you. That's the kind of play and idea I kind of had when I was thinking about these returns, is how do we expand this overall experience? Because we have so much data going back and forth. How do we utilize that data for the benefit of the consumer and the company, right? So those are my thoughts.
Yeah, I agree fully, Matthew. I think it's a dynamic return policy to reward the good actors and penalize the bad ones. But that's harder to do than it is to say, because what you need there is the actual condition. of that product when it gets back. Everyone's going to say, oh, the shoes didn't fit me. But if there's no tread left on those shoes and they've been worn 100 times, that's the difference. And if you don't have a light that's shown on the actual condition, that's where this idea falls down. But then it also depends on what's the weight. I remember at Shopify, we had a fishing lure merchant, which extremely cheap. It was like 4-ounce outbound packages. That label to get it back is going to be fraction of a 10-piece cookware set of pots and pans. So I think that's going to matter. And then the value. Is it a $10 phone case or high-end leather goods? I think that's also the main thing to look at. But yeah, I don't think it's a one-size-fits-all. Every merchant's going to have to understand what their buyers are like and who that individual is. And hopefully they have that data into what Ben did versus Matthew versus John versus Jess, because it could be completely different in a wide spectrum.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So we're at the initiating return phase, Ben.
Yes.
Take us somewhere else.
So let's go blast from the past, which unfortunately still see a lot when I go visit warehouse. And that's a worker there receiving things blind, right? It's a Gaylord from Postal. Could be 100 units for 100 different brands. How do they understand what's in the package first off, who it came from, what buyer, and how to inspect that product? Typically, it's a paper-based binders. I see a lot of like posters taped to the wall, right? And a lot of just tribal knowledge. These folks have been trained. It's taken weeks, and they kind of go off heart. That starts to fall down when you're signing more brands. Those brands now have diversified catalogs, right? They started by selling shoes, but now they're selling hats, accessories. All those have distinct nuances. And what makes matters worse is a lot of these brands, to your earlier point, Jess, are running really different tech stacks. Some might sell on Shopify, some are on Amazon, some are on BigCommerce. And then those RMA initiators, right? Some folks love Loop, but others are on Aftership or Happy Returns. And that starts to get really tough to manage at scale, okay? A lot of mistakes happen, inaccuracies. I talk to brands about this, and they say, it's a coin flip, 50-50, whether that stuff goes back to stock. And the worst outcome possible is something with damage gets marked as back to stock, and it gets resold at full price, and that next buyer gets it, and there's a scuff or a stain. That could burn the bridge with their trust entirely, right? And that happens.
Oh, I would say that completely does. Like, that's the biggest risk why I think so many people err on the side of, disposal or, sort of alternate distribution than resale.
Yes. Now, because of that, right? Think of the psychology, the behavior of that warehouse worker. If that product goes to the trash, no one knows the wiser, right? It's now in the ether. They're not getting in trouble. Where that hurts is the brand. Their back to stock rates start to suffer. And now, well, the environment is also getting hurt because it's ending up at the landfill, but now they're having to buy more inventory, paying transportation, all the time lags, right? With lead times coming from overseas, all that stuff. And so I think what brands need to be really cognizant of is, what is that restock rate? Is it a 50% coin flip, or can I somehow potentially remediate that product, whether it's a rebag, retag, spot removal, lint roll? Those things are pretty simple and the labor cost is pretty low. But again, it has to be done at scale. If there's thousands of them a day, you can't afford to be flipping through a 100-page manual to understand how to re-sticker something or relabel it, right? So that's where I think technology is the true solution in the warehouse to pull it off at scale.
Well, that's, yeah, because to your point, right, there's all kinds of information about human psychology and, our decision making sort of processes, and how same conditions, same product, same whatever, 2 different days and something completely unrelated, like you had a bad evening or whatever, you're going to make a different decision. And that's really what has to stop as well, right?
Yes. Needs to be just objective, system driven.
Well,
go ahead, Jess. Yeah.
Sorry, it's interesting. Kyle, the Two Boxes founder, posted on LinkedIn this morning about a new case study with a 500% return to stock improvement with one of your customers. And I didn't read the case study, but I was just like, that's a big number. But putting it in the context of the conversation we just had, I was like, oh, I see how that's, possible. Do you think, Ben, this is a place where computer vision AI can start to help? Or do you see a future where we ask our customers to take pictures before they drop it in the box, or leverage some sort of camera vision to help us make more objective decisions inside the warehouse?
I think potentially, yeah. And the more upstream you do it, the better. It's just if that consumer has ulterior motives or they're just trying to get refunds, right?
Yeah.
Because what we find is, you know how you pick the reason code when you're returning? That's only 10% accurate, right? They're choosing either the top selection in the dropdown because it's quick, or they're checking the reason that they think they have the strongest possibility of getting a refund. So in my eyes, it's got to be a third-party objective person figuring out, is this resellable or not? But that's based on the brand's expectations, because different brands have different leniency for what gets restocked. Now, this is where I also think re-commerce becomes a potential solution, because I think in the old days, it was either back to stock, donate, or destroy. Pretty simple. Now there's what we call a B grade, where it's being resold at 20% off on another channel, different price point. But that operationally is very tough to do because they have to be marked separate so they don't get mixed up with original condition. And then you need to have all the financials of, hey, I've got a certain quantity of this, needs to be relisted somewhere else. And for 3PLs running on Excel sheets or whiteboards, that's really tough to do.
Well, and re-commerce in the sense of domestic re-commerce, which I think is really what it needs a big push, right? There's a lot of re-commerce that happens by taking, huge amounts of product and shipping them to other parts of the world, for example. But how do you, to your point, how do you quickly do it at scale where you might have 15 of those particular t-shirts as a SKU style reference or something like that, right? But they're not all necessarily exactly the same, or maybe, 4 or 5 of them are one way, 1 or 2 are a different way, and still really trying to capture them very quickly. It's funny. There's a new startup down in the US. I don't know if I should. I won't put their name just because it's not a plug or anything like that. But they really do. They take a lot of individual items. They get it up on their site really, really quickly, and it sells really fast. So they've kind of really tackling that head-on issue of how quickly can you bring something in, give it an accurate sort of presentation of what it is, and allow people to buy it. You know what I mean? Which I think is the biggest challenge, Ben. Like to your point, is how do you, to your point, segment them, get them into the right place at the right time, and then what then does that sort of disposition value become or whatever?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that data capture I think is a necessity, and it's also going to help power that dynamic return policy on the buyer level, right? It's kind of twofold, but I don't think we've even mentioned this yet, guys. Is there's still a lot of prevalent quality issues where it's not a bad actor. It's not the 3PL picking the wrong product. It's actually the factory had a bad production run, right? Typically, merchants will cut a PO with a factory overseas that gets sent via freight right to the 3PL, inbounded, pick, pack, shipped. Brands never seeing that physical product until they start seeing returns come through. Now, if they don't have the data capture, they don't have photos from the warehouse floor, they could just think, oh, the sizing's off, or there's a bunch of, flaky, finicky buyers out there. But in fact, there could be a defect that they don't know about, and now they're bleeding money because all that stuff's probably not being restocked. It's going to the landfill. So I think that's also a very important thing to be aware of, especially when you're looking at new suppliers, new factories, rolling out new collections in your catalog. Quality becomes very, very important.
That's super interesting. I'm wondering what you think of technology in this returns space. Like what areas and which sort of questions that we're trying to answer in terms of less returns, more efficient returns, a better return process. Where do you think technology can have the biggest impact, and maybe which technologies start to make sense?
And to add to that, where logistics has the biggest impact in there as well, that can kind of help. Is it your warehouse, your 3PL, does it make a big difference, or et cetera?
For sure. Yeah, so I think, starting with step one, that initiation, there's a lot of great self-service tools out there. And I think Loop is the leader of the pack, at least today. But also, Happy Returns, Aftership, Narvar, Redo are all solid options depending on what the brand needs. So that, I don't think this is reasonable anymore for a merchant to say, hey, email us at this generic email to start your return. I think that you're already behind if that's still your return policy, right? So that's step one. Step two is what you talked about, Matthew, the logistics. What label is going to be applied to that return, and which warehouse, what location is going to receive that? Because it doesn't have to be the origin address where it was shipped from. It could be a centralized location. It could be as close to the buyer as possible. That's going to cut down on that cost and time as well, right? And then once it gets to the warehouse, having scalable SOPs, not just at the merchant level, but down to the product level, and having real-time photo capture, having those value-added services be performed very system-driven, without guesswork, without leafing through binders. So having that efficient and scalable in warehouse for the data capture. And that data can't just live at the warehouse in a silo. It needs to go back to the brand. And that's what's going to power the two things we mentioned, both the dynamic return policy down to the individual, but then also the re-commerce channel. So knowing what condition should be resold at on what site. Because I think you're right, John, like the old school way is like, I call it more liquidation, where you just sell it by pound or by kilogram and it goes overseas. Cool, but you're probably eating 90% or more of cost of goods sold. Rather, can you have it listed at 20% off original price? And sometimes we've seen in the data, that's how you're capturing your first time customer, is through a re-commerce site, which will now lead to a longer term relationship with that buyer. And then the word of mouth and all that organic kind of, marketing is almost stemming from re-commerce. And so that's the last thing to figure out. What re-commerce solution works best for you? There are lots. Arrive, Treat, Recurate, Comeback Goods. Those are some of the ones we're seeing, but they have different business models. Some create a secondary store. Some will relist it on the original store, or some have peer-to-peer, where it's more like, Facebook Marketplace or eBay, where you're buying from a fellow consumer and the brand doesn't get in the way. It's like, well, it's in this condition, this is how it's going to be resold. So a lot of different options. Even brands are still doing the sample sales, warehouse sales, where it's like twice a year and it's all the returned inventory, but now it's all separated and classified off the grade and, different price point. So lots to figure out there, but hopefully that helps paint a picture of what the new technology can help with.
Well, and maybe it's a trip, Matt, maybe to jump into it a little bbit, because we're talking about things like getting labels and tech stocks and shipping things back, right? Everyone kind of defaults right away just thinking parcel shipping, USPS, Canada Post, FedEx, UPS, doesn't matter. But everyone has that sort of infrastructure in mind. But now all of a sudden, whether you're using those guys or not, they have similar moves. But if you're using a regional player, what does it actually take more in that, let's call it transportation middle mile, right? Because it's all great to get to warehouses, but nobody wants to drop off where logistics kind of, probably still has some opportunities. Like, how do you do better either consolidation, or why do you need to do better consolidation if you really want to do this effectively at any kind of scale?
Yeah, I think the volumes are going to determine, is consolidation viable, or is just mail in single parcel the best option? And then of course, what's that shipping profile? Is it 10-piece cookware that's 30 pounds dim weight, or is it a little fishing lure that you can easily just throw in a poly bag? So things like, Happy Returns, Return Bear, there's some other consolidators where it makes it very convenient to drop off in a physical brick and mortar location. But if you're a smaller brand and you're only getting 10 returns a day, that consolidation might take days, if not weeks, to get back to the warehouse. And that's something we haven't talked about yet, is brands refund buyers at different stages in the cycle. Some do it as soon as you drop it off at the UPS store. Some do it when it's received and there's a delivery scan at the warehouse. But what we're finding is a lot of brands are moving it downstream post-inspection. Because of that, we call it empty box problem. If you're refunding on receipt at the warehouse, word might get out and people are going to start sending back empty boxes. They're going to collect their refund and they're going to resell that perfect condition product on Marketplace, Craigslist, Kijiji, whatever it is. And so when they move it downstream post-inspection, now chargebacks rear their ugly head. If that bad actor doesn't get their refund, they're filing a chargeback to credit card, Visa, MasterCard. When they come back to the brand or the warehouse saying, well, where's your evidence of an empty box or an onion instead of shoes? But you threw that in the garbage, you don't have a leg to stand on. There's no evidence. So that's where that photo capture, the timestamp, the audit trail is going to help fight those chargebacks, and they should go away if you have that evidence. So there's little like small tweaks you can make to the business, but it's going to open and expose you to different risks depending on how you set it up.
It's interesting. I feel like returns has historically been, I don't know, something that the logistics team or the shipping team figured out. And now it feels like it really needs to move so far upstream in an organization, like from what you're talking about, accounting and security and logistics and marketing, and everyone really needs to be involved in this. This is now a company-wide endeavor that really needs to focus on the scope of the problem, and the folks that are still piecemealing it without putting together a true strategy for the return, the way they have a true strategy for the outbound, are going to be left behind.
Yeah, I think with any of these solutions we're mentioning, I think real-time data capture is the path to enable these things from becoming successful or failure. And I'll explain just one scenario that I know every brand struggles with, and that's their replenishment, planning, and procuring more inventory, right? Let's say you're a brand and your top selling SKU is out of stock. You need to reorder. But what if there's 1,000 units outstanding in your returns flow and your back to stock rate historically is 80%? Well, that stuff should be your organic replenishment, and maybe you don't have to purchase as much, or you can let that decision lag. If you don't have the real-time visibility into how many SKUs are coming back, what condition they're actually in, and what those ETAs are in terms of transportation or processing time at the warehouse, you're running blind and you're just shooting into the dark, and you're making purchasing decisions that are probably not optimized based off minimum order quantities in the lead times, right? Do I get expedited freight, or can I go slow and cheap? All those decisions, you need this actionable data to become sharper and obviously more profitable on. So I think whenever, if you're a 3PL or you're a brand, you're looking at some of these tools, keep that in mind. The real-time data is going to be the true unlock.
Well, sorry, and just on that, if you think, but not just your general sort of product mix, but I mean, think about anything you're running that might be a drop, might be a promotion, might be a limited run, right? The last thing you want to do is have what you perceive as your sale running out, right? Oh, I sold out. And then to your point, I've still got X% of actual inventory that some customer right now is disappointed because they wanted to buy it, they were dying to buy it, but couldn't because it didn't, it was out of stock, it left the system. It was temporarily out of stock because there wasn't enough, but now all of a sudden you've got, maybe 10, 15% of your original inventory back, but now no one's looking for it.
Yeah, it gets tough. I just explained some of the exposure or challenges a brand might have, but let's talk 3PLs. I think the last decade, the number one issue, if you talk to any ops, GM manager, it's labor, right? It's finite. There's obviously different quality of labor, and it's extremely competitive, right? Minimum wages keep going up. Unemployment's coming down. And if Amazon opens up down the road and they're offering 25 cents more per hour, you could be losing your best warehouse associates. And so I think that that's really important, because same thing as a brand. If you have 10,000 returns coming back tomorrow or next week, you need to plan against that. And if it's a black hole and you only have 5 workers and 10,000 units show up, you're probably going to be missing your SLAs, or you're going to be cutting corners, and the performance is going to take a nosedive, and brands are going to have a bad challenge there. So that's just one component. I also would say the consumables, right? The custom packaging, the marketing inserts, the stickers, the tissue paper. If you have 10,000 returns coming back tomorrow, you might need to reorder if you only have 10 of those left. You don't want that unplanned downtime to hit, right? Where you're starting to process returns and then you ran out of consumables and now that stuff just sits until it arrives. You need to be proactive and have that forward-looking visibility so that you can take on these. We all know logistics, so cyclical, so seasonality, like depending on the product. So that's where you need that forward-looking visibility.
See, that's a good point. I didn't think about that. Sorry to jump in, Jess, but even think about that, where even when you return something, it's not in the same state that you got it in. And if you have a proper boxing of something, and it's part of the experience of that retailer, you got to make sure that you have all those available materials to resend it after you've returned it. So there's a cost associated. So even though the product might be good, but there's that labor aspect of it too. So even if you bring it back to your 3PL, they don't do the pick and pack. They don't do the whole aspect of it again, or they might not have those materials because it's at your head warehouse. It becomes a whole new conundrum in that whole space that you weren't expecting. So then you gotta, like you said, you have to know the quality of it. Is it worth it? What do I do at that point? Or do you do like a Best Buy open box deal at that point, and you go, hey, listen, you're not gonna have the great unboxing experience, but you're gonna get 20% off this one, because it's an open box special price, which we've touched upon before. Sorry, Jess, you're going to jump in.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, like, given the situation, and I think returns has been a thorn in the 3PL side for quite a while and has made it difficult. It's made the operating environment really difficult. Who do you think is more excited about the impact of this type of technology, like 3PLs or brands? Or is this going to be it probably already is. It's like, hey, if you're engaging with a technology that's going to help us with this disposition stuff, your returns cost is going to be lower in my warehouse. Or, hey, I'm not even going to accept you as in my warehouse if you aren't got this as part of your returns tech stack. Like, I think that the 3PLs, especially the bigger ones, the ones that are looking to continue with the highest throughput, are probably really incentivized to push brands in this direction.
Yeah, I think they're both going to benefit, but in very different ways. And I'll try to boil it down into high level stuff, and then we'll go into the weeds a little more. But for a brand, that visibility is going to be the true unlock, right? For their dynamic return policies, re-commerce, understanding how to price returns, right? At checkout or on their portals, things like that. Now, and also the quality issues from the manufacturer. That's the other big visibility unlock. But on a 3PL side, that operations team, I think it really boils down to efficiency. So doing more units per hour, right? Throughput, I think it's the number one thing, but also think, how do they bill their customers at the end of every month? If they're doing lint rolling, steaming and pressing, all these services, but they're not tracking it, they don't know their true cost or time that goes into it, how the heck are they supposed to invoice their customer with confidence and accuracy, right? Very tough. Not to mention, are they in an RFP bidding out a new client? How are you supposed to price it competitively? And so you're not eating into your profit margin because you went too low or you went too high and missed the opportunity. So I think that we call it revenue recognition is a big, big part of this returns processing kind of strategy.
Who would you say that has the best grasp on their whole return? Like, which brand do you think has a great whole idea of what's going on through all of that you've mentioned? Would you call I don't want to quote John, it's not a plug, but I'm just curious who has the solution down pretty good?
I'll just give you one I've seen firsthand. I can't go into like the particulars, but everyone knows it because it's a household name brand, and that's Yeti coolers.
Nice.
Very high end, right? I'm not sure many people can afford it at original cost, but what they did is they created a re-commerce channel. It's called Yeti Rescue. So if you go on yeti.com, you can see that little section. And what it is it's all the return coolers coming back that have been refurbished, remediated. So they're almost like new. And I think that's really cool because now they can maybe get new customers at a lower price point that if they really like that product, now they're buying other accessories at full price. And this stuff isn't just going to the landfill. So there's a huge environmental impact. Clove is one we just released a case study for. They sell like nursing footwear, which again is pretty high price point. A lot of their workers might not be able to afford that. So they have a nearly new offering, which is returned inventory at a lower price. And they're finding that's really converting well, and it's leading to long-term customers. But none of these things could be possible without that operational, performance and capability. And they're using technologies like ours to pull that off at scale. So those are just
and I think our REI too recently has a used store now too, where that's a mix of returns and allowing their members to send back, used merchandise. So not as a return, but so now they're like, oh, we have two avenues. And then this is giving us the opportunity to, achieve our sustainability goals, do something with all of these returns because they have an incredibly generous return policy and, turn a profit. So maybe they've, said, okay, if I can get this number of returns into this re-commerce store, then we can start to actually have some economies of scale here.
Yeah. I'll just finish on, I kind of forgot one challenge that was really important 3 to 4 years ago. It's starting to dissipate, but that's floor space, right? I think if you ever talk to a 3PL during COVID, their inventory was touching every wall and every ceiling in the building. They had stuff in trailers in the yard. I'm sure people had stuff at their, boardrooms and the conference rooms just because the sheer influx. Think about that though in returns, right? If it's coming back and it's Gaylords or pallets and it just sits, you're eating up capacity because you could be using that floor space for other activities that are revenue generating. And so that's a finite resource that, yes, there's been some relief now, but it's still something to keep in mind. If you know what your volumes are in the future, maybe you can adjust your SLAs, hire more labor, more packaging, and chew through a lot of the backlog faster, which at the end of the day, the buyers are going to have a better experience because now they're getting refunds faster, right? Versus we've done tests. You buy things online, send it back perfect condition. There's been times it takes over 30 days to get a refund. That shouldn't be the case. If you're only allowed to return something within 30, why should your refund lag that long? It's because it's sitting in a warehouse collecting dust and they don't have enough labor or material or technology to process it at scale. So
plus the 3PLs can't charge storage if they don't receive that. I mean, the brands can't sell it, but the 3PLs are taking up floor space that they aren't charging for.
It's dormant. It's in no man's land. It's just sitting there in the void until that inspection and disposition has been declared. So you really want to try to close that gap if you're a 3PL, right? From your receiving time to back available for sale, you need to optimize there.
And I think it comes down to what you said at the beginning. It comes down to that quality aspect of it and being able to really, as quickly as possible, identify the problem, see how quickly you can get into the system, get that data in front of the retailer, to be really conscious of what he should be doing next versus it being some, somewhere on the wall somewhere. I was at the Target on-site and when they were in Canada, there was a giant sections in the warehouse in Milton of just returns, and the system wasn't able to it was a system problem at the time. It wasn't able to process all that, what to do and what to do next, and it just took up retail space that was highly needed. And you'd walk down and half of it would be like, oh, these are all returns, and where do they go? They go, we don't know, we haven't figured it out. It was a system issue in that, and we didn't even talk about touch too much upon it, is that interactiveness of all these systems and different vendors into a central location, and how do we kind of identify it in a more quicker, proper way. And to Jess's earlier comment, AI probably, using some kind of visual intelligence, quickly being able to identify things and go, hey, this is in perfect order. We can move this. And this one needs a secondary inspection or a tertiary inspection, and move that process along. Anything sitting anywhere, whether it's a truck, trailer, product that is not being consumed by the end user, I think is a problem for the supply chain, right? And
It's
we need to
waste.
be able to make it move as quickly through it, not just in time, but into the right hands aspect of it.
Yeah. How many, swimsuits are you going to be selling in mid-January, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's just not. So there, the clock's ticking. And I would also say, there's a lot of what ifs. So, okay, product sitting there, brands like, well, I don't know the condition. So it could be a bad actor. There could be quality issues. We even found a case where it was neither. It was the packaging material was too tight to the product, and the ink from the box was leaking onto that end product, so it kept getting returned. So in that case, it's like it's a D option where it wasn't someone being fraudulent. It was more or less they didn't design the packaging to have that void of a half an inch. Or we've also heard transportation, it gets banged around, right, and freight. So
And we've talked a lot about fraud, but I don't know if I have this number exactly right, but I think it's at like 13%, some pretty high number of this pretty high number of returns is fraudulent. So this is something that we really and truly have to address in the problem, even though I'd love to believe that people are better than that.
the fraud numbers are the ones that are going up the most, right?
Mm-hmm.
And was it an honest, I put my Nikes instead of Adidas in there? Or I don't know if you saw the story, Amazon warehouse, they opened up the parcel and a cat jumped out.
Oh my goodness.
And it was a return, right? So like that stuff happens, and it's just people are returning 5 things to 5 different merchants, and they just cross their wires. And
well, I mean,
PetSmart.
My sister-in-law.
This cat wasn't shedding too much.
My sister-in-law did a return to Amazon, and her 14-year-old daughter put the wrong things in the wrong box, and thankfully it all went back to the same place and they figured it out. But I was like, that there's sometimes an honest mistake that falls into this category, but certainly we have a lot of folks that are doing the wrong things.
Well, and you got to remember, on the reverse, it's the onus is on that consumer, and some of them just don't care. They're like, it's not my problem. I don't like this. I'm returning it. I need you to figure it out. I'm not wasting my time for your problem. And some people do see in that aspect, and you can't help those situations, but those are usually the exceptions to the rule more so than not. Same as getting banged up as in transportation. It like all these little factors matter. Like how many, your 3PL, how high do they stack it and how heavy do they crush the boxes, or all that matters. And people are just looking at those KPIs and they get, analysis paralysis. We're like, I want to get the best density to get the best rate to move this to make my profitability. But then you don't look at the end goal of, hey, this is increasing my returns and it's cutting into that profitability. Had I designed that process better, where it's not 96 high, it's going to be 60 high. The boxes are going to be more intact. They're not going to tip as much. The end user is going to reduce the return rate. We'll probably, and I'm guessing here, we'll probably reduce the amount of returns you would have in those kind of scenarios, helping increase your revenue because you're not getting that much of an influx. So your whole process along the way, like you said, the boxing, all that really, really matters, from your procurement to your delivery along that supply chain. If you want to reduce those returns, have those proper policies to all the way through. And to John's point too, is knowing your consumer at the beginning, what they like, and identifying the proper item for that person is going to be fantastic. So my question probably because we're almost at time, is how do you see, Ben, maybe I know we talked a lot about in the past too, but I do have to ask, is the Temus, the Sheins, and the TikToks, how are they going to solve this return problem? Because they're all across the way. Yep. They're overloading our system, bringing all this product back. Everything I've read so far is that return policy's been like so hard to get product back to them.
Yep.
How do you see them solving that challenge, or are they going to just add to the landfills here, and bless you, Jess, and be part of that process there?
Yeah, it's a great question. I've helped a lot of merchants with their globalization, right? And it's typically finding a partner in that domestic market. Okay. And so there's a few different things that you can do. Have that, but here's what remains consistent. Have that partner receive all those return, so you're close to the buyer to cut down on transportation costs. Some of them are consolidating it and shipping it back to the origin, that home country of the brand or marketplace, and then they can do those warehouse sales, sample sales there. Others, though, are finding those re-commerce channels or partners domestically in those other regions and then reselling it back to that same domestic market. And so I don't think there's like, one or better. It's going to depend on that brand, the price points, the weight, right? The profile of their shipping. But I think that's what you need, is that partner domestically there, because to do air freight or containers of returns back just wouldn't really make sense based on like volumes or, the cost. So you definitely need a warehouse to receive them stateside or province side here in Canada, right?
All right. Well, thank you so much, Ben, for joining us today. Matt, John, any final thoughts before we let everyone go? I think it's been an awesome discussion, and I truly enjoyed it.
That was my final thoughts. I'll leave it to John, Ben, and Jess to kind of close it off there.
No, I don't have any, other than saying that, it's obviously a space that's evolving a lot with a lot of depth. And I think that, people should, the takeaway is just being that it's maybe not just a quick fix, and that you really have to have a lot of intention around it.
Thanks, John. Just my final statement is thank you for hosting me. It's been a great discussion. If anyone's interested to talk returns, logistics, e-commerce, hit me up on LinkedIn, visit twoboxes.com. We have a ton of great partners. So if you need a particular part of your business optimized and need ideas or intros, referrals, we love to, share our network with everyone. And that includes the four of us in this room. So hope everyone has a great weekend, and thank you again.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.